The order came through at 0340, and the man who gave it did not lower his voice. Captain Aldous Streck stood at the center of the forward operations tent with the particular stillness of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. He was not shouting. That was the thing about Streck that people remembered later when they were trying to explain what had happened. He never needed to shout. He had the kind of authority that fills a room the way cold air fills a room. You feel it before you understand it. "We have 11 minutes before the convoy reaches the junction," he said. "After that, they're in the open for 400 meters with no cover and no abort option." He looked around the tent, 12 soldiers. Most of them had been awake for 31 hours. "I need eyes on the ridge. Someone who can work a long gun in the dark and still give me useful numbers." Nobody moved. Not because they were cowards. That needs to be said plainly. The soldiers in that tent had between them survived 3 deployments, 2 vehicle rollovers, and a building collapse in Kandahar that killed 8 people from another unit. They were not cowards. They were tired, and they were doing the math, and the math was not good. The ridge Streck was describing sat at approximately 640 meters from the operations tent. In daylight, with a spotter, with a stable platform, and a calibrated scope, that was a difficult shot. At 0340, with a wind that had been shifting every 4 minutes since midnight, with thermals rising off the valley floor below, that was not a shot. That was a prayer with a barrel attached. So nobody moved. And then from the far left of the tent, near the equipment wall where the radio cabling ran in bundles along the floor, a hand went up. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was the kind of hand raise you'd see in a classroom, small and unhurried, as though the person attached to it was mildly surprised to find themselves doing it. Streck looked at her. Specialist Vanya Correll was 27 years old, 5'6", and had spent the better part of the last 8 months assigned to logistics coordination. She had a degree in applied mathematics from the University of Waterloo. She had qualified on the C-14 Timberwolf during her initial training and had subsequently been transferred sideways into a support role because her unit needed someone who could manage supply chains under pressure, and she was, by all accounts, exceptionally good at it. She was not, by anyone's account, a combat sniper. "Correll," Streck said. His voice didn't change. "You understand what I'm asking. 640 to the ridge lip," she said. "Elevation gain of about 38 meters. Wind's been gusting south-southwest at around 12 to 14 knots, but it's been cycling. There's a low-pressure system moving through from the northwest, so I'd expect the gusts to drop in the next 20 minutes and shift more westerly." She paused. "I'd want to get up there now before the temperature gradient stabilizes and the thermals get worse." Streck was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching the weather," he said. "I've been watching everything," she said. "It is worth understanding before any of this goes further what watching everything actually means for a person like Vanya Correll, because it is not a personality quirk or a nervous habit or the kind of detail a storyteller drops in to make a character seem interesting. It is a cognitive orientation. It is the way certain people are built. Correll had been diagnosed at age 9 with what her school psychologist described as an unusual relationship with numerical patterns. Her mother, a retired RCMP officer from Saskatoon, had been less diplomatic. She called it the thing Vanya does where she can't stop counting. The number of steps between buildings, the cycling time of traffic lights, the rate at which a water stain on the ceiling expanded after rain. She counted these things not because she chose to, but because her mind registered them the way other minds register faces. Automatically, immediately, without effort. In high school, she'd been told she had a gift. In university, she'd been told she had a future. In the Army, she'd been told she had a posting in logistics, which was, in the considered opinion of the person who made that decision, the most efficient use of her abilities. Correll had never argued with this. She had gone to logistics. She had been efficient. She had also quietly, on every range day she could access, continued to shoot, not to prove anything, not to anyone. She shot because the mathematics of long-range marksmanship, the interplay of distance, elevation, air density, wind deflection, muzzle velocity, Coriolis effect at extreme ranges, was the only context in which all the counting in her head became not just useful but necessary. It was the only place where the thing her brain did without stopping was exactly the right tool for the job. She had not told anyone this. There had been no reason to. Until 0340, when there was. Streck gave her 6 minutes to prepare. The rifle she pulled from the armory rack was a C-14 Timberwolf, the standard Canadian Forces long-range precision weapon, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. She checked the scope mounts, adjusted the cheek piece, and took a spare box of ammunition without being asked. She did not take a spotter. There was no one available who knew how to work in tandem with her, and she had decided, in the time between raising her hand and reaching the equipment rack, that a spotter who didn't know her rhythm would be worse than no spotter at all. Sergeant Dion Whitaker, the ranking NCO in the tent, fell into step beside her as she moved toward the exit. "Correll," he said quietly. "You sure about this?" She thought about the question. It was a fair one. "No," she said. "But I'm more sure than anyone else here." Whitaker looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be on comms. You call your corrections out loud, even if you think I won't understand them, in case something happens and someone needs to reconstruct what you did." She hadn't thought of that. She appreciated it. "Copy," she said, and went out into the dark. The walk to the ridge took 4 minutes at a controlled pace. She moved without a light, which was a choice she made in the first 30 seconds, based on the ambient star visibility and her memory of the approach terrain from the aerial photographs she had reviewed during the mission briefing 48 hours earlier. Those photographs were not in front of her. They didn't need to be. She had a memory for spatial layouts the way she had a memory for numbers, not photographic exactly, but structural. The shape of things stayed with her. She found her position on the ridge at a natural rock depression that offered a stable natural rest and a clear line of sight down the valley approach. She settled in, pulled her thermal layer tighter, and began the process of reading the environment. The wind, as she had predicted, was cycling. She timed 3 gusts over the next 4 minutes, 11 T8, 13.2, and 12.4 knots by her estimation, each one lasting between 6 and 9 seconds, each followed by a relative lull of 14 to 18 seconds. The lulls were her window. She ranged the junction where the convoy would emerge, 617 meters. Not 640, as the briefing map had suggested. The briefing map had been using a grid reference system that didn't account for the actual terrain curvature. She adjusted her elevation accordingly. The temperature at ground level was 4 degrees Celsius. She estimated the temperature differential between ground and ridge level, a difference of roughly 65 meters of altitude, at approximately 1.1 degrees, enough to matter at this range. She adjusted again. Whitaker's voice came through the earpiece. "Convoy has left the staging point. 11 minutes to the junction. Copy," she said. She did not add anything else because she was counting. What she was counting specifically was the pattern of vehicle movement she could detect through the thermal scope on the eastern slope of the valley. 2 trucks. No, 3. The third was running without lights, which explained why the reconnaissance flight had logged only 2. The third vehicle was positioned centrally in the formation, which was the placement protocol for a command element. This was the piece of information that changed everything. Though she did not know that yet, she keyed the radio. "Whitaker, I'm seeing 3 vehicles on the eastern slope. Third is running dark, central position. Standard command placement." A pause. Then Streck's voice replaced Whitaker's. "Correll, confirm. Third vehicle, command position, confirmed. They've been holding position for approximately 6 minutes based on the heat signature of the engine block. They knew we had a convoy inbound." Another pause, longer this time. "They knew," Streck said, and the way he said it told her everything about what that meant. It meant there was a leak somewhere. It meant the convoy was not walking into a random ambush. It meant someone had given these people a schedule. It also meant the command vehicle was the priority. "Range on the third vehicle," Streck said. Correll had already calculated it, 592 meters. It's partially behind a rock formation. "I have a window of approximately 40 centimeters on the left rear quadrant. That's the engine block. I cannot guarantee a crew kill from this angle. I can guarantee a mobility kill. If you take the engine, they lose coordination capability. If that vehicle has the comms equipment standard to a command element, yes. They lose encrypted radio capability and likely lose their command and control link to whatever forward element they have positioned on the valley floor. Streck was quiet for 4 seconds. In battlefield decision-making, 4 seconds is a long time. It means someone is doing something harder than calculation. They're doing judgment. "Do you have the shot?" he said. Correll put her eye to the scope. The lull cycle was at 8 seconds, which meant she had approximately 6 seconds remaining before the next gust. The vehicle's engine block was at the left edge of the rock cover. The window was there. It was not a comfortable window. It was the kind of window that exists briefly between geological certainty and complete impossibility. "I have it right now," she said. "Then take it." The trigger broke at a point she had been anticipating for approximately 1.3 seconds. Not the moment she decided to fire, but the moment her finger had been telling her was coming, the way a pianist knows the note is arriving before they strike the key. The rifle moved in recoil. She tracked back to target. The third vehicle's engine compartment produced a secondary heat event that bloomed in the thermal scope like a flower opening in time lapse. The vehicle stopped moving. She was already adjusting for the second target before she registered that she had hit the first one. What happened in the valley over the next 11 minutes is a matter of documented record, but the record does not capture the texture of it, so it is worth describing. The convoy reached the junction. The ambush on the valley floor was there, as intelligence had suggested it would be, but the ambush had lost its coordination capability when the command vehicle went down. The encrypted radio link that connected the forward element to the command position had died with the engine block. What remained were individual fighters who still knew the plan, but who no longer had anyone to adapt the plan when the plan stopped working. Plans stop working when someone does something unexpected. In this case, the unexpected thing was that the convoy did not follow the road as anticipated. The convoy commander, a warrant officer named Théodore Villeneuve, who had been running convoys in difficult terrain for 9 years, saw the burning vehicle on the eastern slope through his night optics and made a judgment call in approximately 2 seconds. He pulled the convoy off the road behind a natural berm and held position. The ambush on the valley floor had been positioned for a moving target on a predictable route. A stationary target behind cover was a different problem, and without coordination, without someone telling them what to do next, the forward element hesitated. In military operations, hesitation is often fatal to the hesitator. By the time the forward element made the decision to reposition, Correll had already identified their movement pattern from the ridge. She did not fire again. The range to the valley floor was beyond consistent precision in the current conditions, and she was not willing to send rounds in a direction that might intersect with the convoy's position. Instead, she tracked. She reported. She gave Whitaker a continuous running description of the movement of every person she could see. And Whitaker fed that information to Villeneuve in the convoy, and Villeneuve used it to time the convoy's extraction through a secondary route that the forward element was no longer in position to cover. The convoy reached the outpost at 0521 with no casualties. Correll came back down from the ridge at 0534. The sky was beginning to separate itself from the mountains, that particular shade pre-dawn blue that soldiers who have done night operations know as the color of finally. She carried the rifle in her right hand and did not hurry. Streck was waiting outside the operations tent. He did not say anything immediately. He was not a man who reached for words as a reflex. "The engine compartment shot," he said eventually, "at 592 through a 40-centimeter window in a variable wind at 0400. "Yes," she said. "In the dark thermal scope," she said. "It was easier in one way, harder in another." He was quiet again for a moment. "You knew you had it," he said. It was not quite a question. She thought about this honestly. "I knew I had the calculation right. The shot itself, you don't know until it happens. You trust the calculation, and you trust your mechanics, and then it either works or it doesn't." She paused. "It worked." Streck nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man updating a file he thought was complete. "Report to me at 0900. I want a full account of your targeting methodology and your wind reading process. Written, if possible. The battalion will want it." She said she would. She went to find somewhere to sit down. 3 weeks later, Correll was called to a meeting that she initially assumed was administrative. It was held in a building that had previously been a schoolroom and still had the chalk outlines of children's drawings on one wall, partially painted over in the beige that military occupation seems to apply to all surfaces regardless of what was there before. The meeting was not administrative. Captain Marguerite Thorne, the senior intelligence officer for the forward operating base, sat across a folding table from Correll and placed a folder between them. The folder was thin. The thin ones, Correll had learned, were usually worse than the thick ones. "The command vehicle you hit," Thorne said. "We've been working on the identification of the occupants." Correll waited. "The individual in the command position was a logistics coordinator," Thorne said. "Not military, by conventional definition. A civilian contractor who had been embedded with this particular group for approximately 14 months. She paused. "He was the one who had access to the convoy schedule. He was the one who passed it." Correll said nothing. "He survived your shot," Thorne continued. "Mobility kill, as you called it. He's in custody. He's been talking." She opened the folder, turned it around, and pushed it across the table. "What he's been talking about is what's going to concern you." The document inside was a surveillance photograph, annotated. Correll looked at it for a long moment. "He wasn't working alone," she said. "It was not a question." "No," said Thorne. "He was working with someone inside the forward operating base, someone who had access to convoy scheduling and route planning." She looked at Correll steadily, someone who knew that the reconnaissance flight had only logged 2 vehicles. Correll looked up from the photograph. "The reconnaissance report was distributed to 12 people," she said. "I was one of them." "Yes," said Thorne, "you were." The silence between them lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then Correll understood. "You're not here to brief me," she said. "You're here to read me." Thorne's expression didn't change, which was in itself a kind of confirmation. "I'm here to have a conversation," she said, "and to tell you that your targeting methodology report has been reviewed by 3 separate analysts, and all 3 of them identified something in the wind reading corrections you documented." "What did they identify?" "A correction you made at 0349 that accounts for a wind shift that the meteorological data says hadn't occurred yet." Thorne folded her hands on the table. "A shift that did occur, approximately 4 minutes later. Which means either you anticipated it or you had information about the atmospheric conditions from a source you haven't disclosed." Correll considered this for a moment. Then she almost smiled, which was not the reaction Thorne had expected. "I was watching the birds," she said. Thorne blinked. "I'm sorry? There's a species of small falcon. Kestrel adjacent, I don't know the local taxonomy, that roosts on the western face of the ridge. They'd been holding their roost position all night. At 0347, 3 of them adjusted, shifted their body orientation about 20 degrees clockwise into what was going to be the new wind direction." She paused. "Birds feel pressure systems before instruments do. I adjusted for the shift when I saw them move." She looked at Thorne. "You can verify that. Go to the ridge at dawn and watch the roosting pattern. It's consistent." Thorne was quiet for a very long moment. "You adjusted your targeting based on birds," she said. "And mathematics," Correll said. "Mostly mathematics. But the birds gave me the trigger." The investigation that followed was neither brief nor comfortable. It involved eventually 43 separate interviews, 2 parallel intelligence reviews, and 1 incident in which a senior officer made a comment about the plausibility of Correll's explanation that Correll answered with a 15-minute extemporaneous breakdown of avian sensitivity to barometric pressure, that the officer later described as the most unsettling meeting of his career. The source inside the forward operating base was identified. It was not Correll. It was a staff sergeant named Pierce, a man who had been with the unit for 6 years and who had, during a compassionate leave 18 months earlier, made contact with a network that had subsequently used that contact as leverage. His cooperation had been gradual, reluctant, and eventually total. He had passed 4 pieces of convoy information in 9 months. The command vehicle that Correll had disabled had been acting on the 4th. When Pierce was confronted, he did not try to run. He sat down in the chair that was placed in front of him and put his face in his hands and said, "I know." Just that, "I know." As if he had been waiting for someone to knock on the door and was only surprised it had taken this long. Correll was not present for this. She was on the range. She had been assigned, following the completion of the investigation and the submission of her targeting methodology to the battalion training office, to a new role. The role did not have a clean title. It was somewhere between precision marksmanship instructor and tactical mathematics consultant, which was a combination that the Canadian forces had not previously found a reason to create. They found a reason. She taught range estimation without instruments. She taught wind reading from terrain features, from vegetation movement, from the behavior of animals. She taught the mathematics of atmospheric density correction in a way that people who were not mathematicians could actually apply under stress, which is a pedagogical problem that is entirely distinct from the mathematical problem itself and considerably harder. She was, by all available accounts, exceptional at it. There was a moment in the 3rd month of her new role that one of her students, a young corporal from Medicine Hat named Alvis Greer, who had come to the course with the particular combination of talent and impatience that makes talented people occasionally terrible, told her during a range session that he didn't see the point of calculating wind from bird behavior when you had instruments. Correll said nothing for a moment. She picked up her own rifle, settled into position at the firing point, and waited. 40 seconds later, a gust crossed the range. The flags along the firing line showed the gust arriving in sequence, left to right. But 43 seconds before the flags moved, every bird on the berm at the end of the range had shifted. She fired. The target, at 600 meters in a variable crosswind, registered a center hit. She stood up, cleared the chamber, and looked at Greer. "Instruments fail," she said. "The wind doesn't care." Greer became one of the best precision shooters in the battalion within 18 months. He sent her a message when he qualified, a short one, the kind that takes longer to decide to send than it takes to write. It said, "I've been watching the birds." In the end, the thing that mattered most about what Vanya Correll did on that ridge, the thing that the formal record fails to capture, and the battalion training documents reduced to a methodology, was something simpler and harder to quantify. She had been put somewhere she was not expected to matter. She had done the work anyway. She had counted the things that nobody else thought worth counting. The wind cycles, the temperature gradients, the roosting patterns of birds in the pre-dawn dark. And she had waited, without bitterness and without announcement, for the moment when counting would be enough. And then the moment came, at 03:50, with a 40-centimeter window and a shifting wind and 11 soldiers' worth of lives moving through a valley below. And she had been ready. Not because she had been told to be ready. Not because someone had recognized what she could do and positioned her accordingly, but because she had recognized it herself, and she had decided, in the quiet way of people who have spent their lives being underestimated, that readiness was not something you performed for an audience. It was something you carried. The convoy reached the outpost at 0521. Vanya Correll came down from the ridge at 0534. She sat outside the operations tent in the early morning cold, with the rifle across her knees and the valley going gray below her. And she did not think about what she had done so much as she thought about the birds. How they had moved, how they had known, how the world is full of information if you are willing to pay attention to the right things. She counted the minutes until full light. There were 14.